For everyone who's tuned in, welcome. My name is Ross Pally, General Manager at Venture Lane. We are a hub and support system for early stage technology companies in Boston, and more recently with the complete virtualization of our program, early stage technology companies everywhere. Today's topic is pricing strategy specifically for the current climate. So how can early stage technology companies be innovative with their pricing strategies to help with sort of revenue headwinds that we're all facing right now, whether it be customer retention or for winning new business. So for today, we have Peter Zotto, General Manager at ProfitWell, and we have Kyle Poyar, who is VP of Market Strategy at OpenView, two fantastic experts and the two best people that we could have to give us some color on pricing strategy for the next 45 minutes. So we'll turn it over to Peter and Kyle in just a moment for a quick backstory for each. For everyone who's tuned in, quick rules of the road. We have a poll open right now. If you see it, the question is, which of the following pricing strategies will be most effective in helping your company retain customers and win new ones in Q3, Q4 of 2020? Pick your top three, and we will be revisiting some of the answers to this poll throughout the 45 minutes, and we'll be asking Kyle and Peter sort of for their insights on these different categories. If you have questions at any point, there is a Q&A button if you hover over the bottom toolbar on your screen. If you have a question about something that Peter or Kyle mentioned, want a point of clarification, pop it into that Q&A portal and we will politely interject and get those things answered. And that is everything for Rules of the Road. So without further ado, Peter, Kyle, thanks so much for joining today. Really appreciative to have you on. Do you maybe want to start, Peter, we'll start with you, quick backstory, what you're doing now, ProfitWell, a couple things you did prior to ProfitWell, and then we'll kick it over to Kyle right after.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ross. Thanks for having me. Psyched to be here. Welcome, everybody. Quick background. I am GM, but what that really means is I'm the guy that ends up putting out a lot of fires that happen within ProfitWell. ProfitWell, we're a local Boston-based company. We do essentially two things, but primarily focus on helping companies within the subscription economy optimize for growth. So we have a product called Price Intelligently, which is essentially like a people-powered product or tech-enabled services that focus on pricing and monetization optimization. And then we have a pure product called ProfitWell, which is a metrics platform. It's a free financial metrics tool for anybody that has a payment system like Stripe or Zora, PayPal, Braintree, ChargeBee, et cetera. And then we sell some premium services on top of that, like credit card dunning solutions called Retain. But I've been doing ProfitWell. We started the business in late 2012. So I've been doing this for just about 8 years. In fact, prior to that, I was at another startup that totally failed. And then prior to that, I didn't cross paths with them, but I worked at OpenView Venture Partners really early on. We were they were a much different firm back then. But I was part of the early crew at OpenView many years ago.
Awesome. Excellent. Kyle?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. So I'm at OpenView. OpenView is a venture capital firm investing in software companies at the expansion stage. So think Series A, Series B is a sweet spot. We've got about 30 active portfolio companies. We're based in Boston. Our portfolio companies are based all around the world, from Australia to Israel and everywhere in between. I guess on both sides. And I've been at OpenView about 4 years. I lead our growth practice. I'm primarily a resource for our portfolio executives to help them really solve their most strategic challenges and drive growth in the business. And so with COVID impacting everyone very much immediately, especially in March, a lot of my focus has been on pricing and packaging strategies to kind of reinvigorate growth in the business or stop the bleeding in some cases. Before OpenView, I was at Simon Kucher, which is a consulting firm known as the largest consulting firm dedicated to pricing and packaging strategy. I was there for 6 years, priced everything from diapers to caskets while I was there. So I like to say I know pricing from cradle to grave.
That's good. Awesome. Okay, great. So for both Peter and Kyle, let's maybe just start with a bit of a primer, kind of lay of the land. what are you both seeing past 60 days right now when it comes to pricing strategy, either for OpenView ProfitWell customers, or on the OpenView side, portfolio companies you're supporting, or maybe some others you're seeing doing some market research? Lay of the land, pricing, big changes you've seen, or things that have caught your attention. Sorry, Peter, we'll kick it off with you.
Oh, okay. You can start with Kyle.
No,
Sure, I'll take it.
Yeah, take it. We were just talking about this, so he's a good person to start with, and then I can follow up.
Great.
Yeah. So the big picture, right, is that the main levers you have to grow are landing new customers and expanding. And so on the landing side, what's been interesting to see, and HubSpot's been releasing some amazing data around this, there's still pretty healthy traffic and engagement with marketing activities from a buyer perspective, but folks aren't actually turning into pipeline and becoming active customers right now, at least not at the rates that they've historically seen. And so a lot of our portfolio companies are trying to think of more aggressive offensive strategies to move that pipeline along. And so one of the ways is through free products or self-service offerings. How can you let people try before they buy with extended trials or a kind of feature-limited free product experience, where once that prospect has budget, they're already successful with your product, you can monetize them later on. Or for those that are more actively in the pipeline, what can you do to try to preserve the price point itself as much as you can, while adjusting sort of at the margins to get that customer to say yes, right? So looking at more flexible contract terms, maybe it's an annual contract with a 4-month opt-out, or an annual contract but paid in monthly installments as opposed to paid up front. And then on the kind of retention side, that's something where a lot of customers are calling in asking for different payment terms, discounts, they're looking to cancel. And so I think our portfolio companies are struggling with deciphering which companies are really kicking the tire. They're asking for a discount, but they don't need it. And which companies are actually, really impacted by COVID-19 and need special circumstances. I think all of our portfolio companies have some sort of program in place around identifying customer health and trying to adapt their pricing to existing customers accordingly. But I think some tips for others on the line are to make sure that you're linking that customer health assessment with the playbook of what you offer the customers, because a lot of folks are trying to renegotiate all their agreements, even if they're still growing through this crisis or have plenty of cash on hand. And then try to make sure the concessions are give to get, right? Like if you are offering something to a customer, a discount, extended contract period, what can you get in return? Can they be a customer? Can they be a customer reference? Can they introduce someone? Can you do a case study with them? There's a lot of potential opportunities to find a win-win in this environment.
Great. So to summarize, seeing a lot of sort of consistent, healthy engagement on the buyer side when it comes to marketing activities, a little bit of a pullback in terms of conversion down the funnel after getting some marketing qualified leads. And then for the current pipeline, trying to figure out with your health checks, which of your customers are at risk more than others. And if you do want to create flexibility, going to the margins for that, not just going to the price itself, and then trying to also figure out, give and get, what you can, what value the customer can bring to you as well in return for financial value for them. Awesome.
Exactly.
I can as a practitioner of this, I can tell like it's Kyle's is dead on in this particular case. I think it's hard though, right? And we are, as a business that sells 2 products today, one of the things that he mentioned is don't necessarily discount for the sake of discounting, because you end up perhaps falling into a trap where you get folks that can come in and can afford or not necessarily impacted by COVID-19, but take advantage of a generous discount because you're offering it. we had a situation where, and our deals are relatively large. We offered a 50% discount to somebody in mid-March because we weren't sure if we were going to get that contract back or if we were going to get that prospect back. At the time, it felt like a great idea because it, from an optics perspective for the team, we said, hey, let's get a win. We can share in Slack. We can share at the all hands. It felt like moving things in the right direction. The reality was, even short time after offering the discount, come to find out, it wasn't enough to move the needle for this particular company, and we wasted probably, I don't know, collectively across the organization 20 plus hours on trying to get this discount done through the board that had to approve it, through the finance team that had to approve it, through the actual project folks that were going to work on the project had to effectively approve it as well. And so we were sort of leading purely with emotion at that point. We weren't really thinking critically about things. And so I think Kyle's right. Don't necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater in this particular case. Use discounting effectively as a way to maybe drive some action for people that are not necessarily active today, but do so with a give and a get. And then the other thing I would mention on that is for companies out there that are selling perhaps monthly or annual deals, I guess in this particular case, instead of always offering a financial incentive, you can offer things like, look, if you buy 12 months, we'll give you the 13th or 14th for free. What that does is it allows you to preserve the list price. And then when people come back for renewal, you don't necessarily discounting off of the list price again. So you're preserving LTV for the long haul, which is a nice thing to do. I think the other thing, Ross, you asked sort of what we're seeing in the past 60 days. One of the things that we're seeing is I think leading indicators from a sales and marketing activity are certainly coming back across the board. Kyle mentioned HubSpot. They've put out some really good information on this, and it's true they were seeing a up and to the right graph or trend line there with leading activities around sales demos, email open rates, et cetera. And now we're waiting sort of for the lagging indicators to come around, so closed business, et cetera there. And I think that's happening a little bit slower than we'd like. The one thing that people can take away that we're noticing is that buyer affinity and preferences have changed. We've seen a massive shift from, and we do a chunk of surveying in the field, we've seen a massive shift from people going to or being excited about, hey, we're going to generate more revenue from you for the top lines of a header on a marketing site, to instead of generating revenue, now it's more of, hey, we're going to actually save you on costs. We're going to save more on costs for the long term. So a slight change in the way that you position your product might have remarkable impact in the short and medium term, especially because we're now moving from pure panic and seas of general business or pipeline into, all right, what are we going to do moving forward, right? And people are still focused on how do we save costs in the short term. A lot of folks are letting people go. A lot of folks are cutting down on tools. One of the things that you can do is you can change your positioning ever so slightly to be about cost savings and less about increasing revenue.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I just kind of add to what Peter said there. I totally agree on the cost savings value prop. One of the ways that our companies are positioning is that you can do more for less with their tool. And so if they're a platform with different capabilities, maybe they're best in breed in part of it, but not in some others. How can they drive more adoption so that the customer is standardizing on their platform as opposed to having 2 or 3 vendors? And it's actually, given this trend right now, it can be difficult to get budget approved for a new item, like a new spend. But if you're able to take budget that had already existed, that's a better position to be in. And so we're seeing a lot more activity around competitive switch campaigns or trying to buy out competitors' contracts. Or if you have a legacy, slow-moving competitor in this space that's been overpriced and is not a super agile solution, you might have a better value prop as your customers are working remotely and can kind of slide in at that budget that's already been approved.
Got it. So it sounds like from a marketing perspective, you're really trying to tweak value proposition a little or a lot. It sounds like some important themes right now are doing more with less and ways that you're providing cost savings, because that's where the acute pain is on the buyer side right now. Awesome. Good insights. So let's segue quickly over to some of the results that we have coming in for our audience poll. We asked folks to tell us what do they think key pricing strategies will be for them in terms of retaining customers and winning new ones in the next couple quarters. Let's start with one of the more interesting options, which was discounting prices on long-term contracts. We did our research before the webinar, checked out the ProfitWell blog, checked out the OpenView blog. this category was meant to be a bit of a imposter. Peter and Kyle, what are your thoughts on just discounting prices on long-term contracts as kind of like a simple go-to solution? What are the downsides of a strategy like that?
So I think there's probably two arguments to be made here. There's sort of like the academic argument to be made, and I think there's the reality or the practice of doing this, which is to say, and I don't know, I'm willing to believe that Kyle and I are probably pretty aligned here, both on the academic and then in reality. When you're talking about like big contracts, long-term contracts, there's reality that like, look, people are going to expect to discount or they're going to expect to negotiate. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, let's assume, by the way, that you've identified what your price point is. And if you've done that appropriately, theoretically, you shouldn't have to discount. Now, granted, if you're going through procurement or you're going through a long sales cycle, you're probably going to have to come across someone that's going to ask you, look, we didn't budget for this, or this is more than we had to budget for. Therefore, if we're going to get this closed today or soon, I'm going to need a 5% discount. If you want this to drag on for another 6 months, sure, I can go to these other departments and get more budget. I can't guarantee that. And so as a business, as yourself as a business, you have to weigh the idea of, is it worth me taking a little bit of money off today to generate, so cash flow, if that's what's important to you. And if that's what's important, by all means, discount. The reality of discounting, though, and this is where I think we probably agree, is that, to some degree, it's like a drug, right? The more you use it, the worse you're ultimately going to feel. It's good in certain circumstances. It's an appropriate tool in your tool bag to use in certain circumstances. But the more that you let it run wild, it's going to take over. And the reason for that is that it will likely eat into your lifetime value of a customer over time. It's going to eat into your margins. It's going to eat into your perception of value. And if you've done everything right up into, hey, I have a good grasp on who my customers are, and I have a good grasp of where the price point should be, what you're doing is effectively shooting yourself in the foot just to appease somebody in the short term. So the way that we combat this, or the way we tell our own folks internally, is we have a process of how you go out and get a discount. If somebody asks for one, we ask why, right? It's not like, hey, sure, here's 10% off the bat. What is it that you need that discount for? Have we not figured out, or have we not communicated value effectively? If it's purely a numbers thing, then we'll talk about where we need to be. And that may mean, to Kyle's point earlier, that you give and get. Let's remove a little bit of what the project is or what the product can do for you in order to get you that discount. Or instead of a discount, can we give you something on top of this to make this a little bit better, right? Can we give you free implementation or free on-demand X or free premium account services? Those things that have high margins for you, but not a lot of cost for you, for your business, is a lot better than purely just discounting off the top. So again, I think to summarize, it's a drug, right? Use it appropriately. Don't get too hooked on it, and set up a process for anybody that has an outside sales team or that's hoping to build an enterprise level sales team. Set up some sort of process. Reps get X%, managers get Y%, the board get Z%, but just make sure you follow some level of protocol there.
Yep, makes sense.
I mean, I mostly agree with Peter, and especially my general philosophy is totally aligned. To play a little bit of devil's advocate on kind of the rationale, I'd say lead with offering more months for free as opposed to discounting on the product. So I think he said earlier, if you have a customer that would sign an annual commitment, can you offer that customer 15 months where their first 3 months are free, and then they're paying the full rate? Because that way, when you exit this period, you'll continue to be at the price that you want to be at, but the customer sees that as a discount. And so I think that those kinds of tactics can work pretty well. I think the other thing that I'm observing is that some companies are in a better position, and they're trying to pull forward expenses that they would otherwise make later on, right? So if you're going to make a really big initiative to change your billing system and you were going to wait until the second half of the year, you now have a team that can actually go implement it, that might have more capacity than they've had before. Mm-hmm. And you might be able to get a concession from a vendor. And so to me, those concessions are more about getting a period for free or at a discounted rate and then moving on to full price. And so there's certainly a rationale around doing it that can be win-win. Just to Peter's point, be strategic with how you use it, and don't resort to discounts as the first move that you make.
Sure. So great segue into another one of the categories that we have here, which tied for one of the more popular ones, running free trials and other fixed term promotions to close new business. Any color to add there, Kyle or Peter, or both?
Kyle, you can take this one to start.
Yeah, so free trials, I'm of a mixed mind about. Like, I think that if you're offering it in a sales cycle where you're able to get like, hey, you get an extra 3 months for free, but in return for a certain commitment, that can be a great sales tactic. I have seen a bunch of companies just move to across the board, like you have a 90-day free trial or you have a 120-day free trial.
Mhm.
And I do worry about the effectiveness of that, because there's a lot of tools where the customer the customer knows it's a really important thing to be implementing in their business, and they know that they want to pick something that's going to be right for them in the long term. And a free trial doesn't necessarily like solve the challenge of, is this a product I want to pay for and use in the long term? And so it might not actually in some cases drive greater adoption, and you lose that sense of urgency that people have to make a decision quickly. And so I think for a lot of businesses, an extended free trial is a great sales tactic, but not necessarily a great marketing tactic.
Mhm.
And it works better if you're selling into an industry that's been immediately impacted by the pandemic, like restaurants or hospitality, where there is this window where they're really impacted, and then they should be coming out of it and will have budget when they come out of it. Otherwise, I tend to prefer either free products or freemium editions as a way to drive more top of funnel and product adoption, as opposed to just resorting to longer free trials.
Important distinction. Is this a marketing tactic or a sales tactic?
Exactly.
Peter,
And I think most people get that wrong, right? Like they look at freemium as, as a play to people, as a monetization play. But the reality is freemium, especially if you don't do it perhaps correctly, all it is an acquisition play, and it may not necessarily work in your favor because, look, you get people in there that are never going to convert. You're spending resources on them. They're not big proponents of your product, and so it just sort of falls by the wayside. I do think I would probably, I don't know where, I think trying to think as it relates to all things COVID-19. One is, and today is very different than it was even 30 days ago. I think we're in a much better place than we were 30 days ago. That's not to suggest that we are out of the woods in any way, shape, or form. We're not. That said, 30 days ago, I think if you had asked ProfitWell at large, given the data that we're seeing and that we're on top of, we would have recommended most people move into a freemium type of an option. And part of the reason for that is because he or she, at the end of the day, with the most customers or users to then sell into, is probably going to win, because there's so much trepidation for trying or buying new things today. So freemium allows you to do that to a level that just creates a massive pool of leads for you to then try to upsell. I think now that we've gone sort of 30 days later, I don't know if that's still the recommendation we would have. I wonder if sort of an extended free trial appropriately used makes more sense. I think that you have to have, I'm trying to think of like what the right strategy is here, right? Because COVID-19 sort of changes perhaps the strategic outlook for a lot of companies out there. If you have a product that you can spin up relatively quickly and you can give to people in a free manner, do so, especially if it doesn't cost you anything to get additional members on that plan. That said, you have to have some level of plan of how you're going to upsell them. What's the right value metric, right? The unit of measurement that you're going to ultimately charge on when they hit a threshold that makes sense for them to be charged. The other thing that I would perhaps have folks think about is, we call it, I don't know what Kyle might refer to it as, but we call it a faux free trial, which is effectively like, look, you can use the product up to a number of certain events every month. And then at the end of, or the beginning of the next month, it resets that to zero, right? So, it might be for people that use like Mixmax or Yesware or something like that, or SalesLoft, when, a customer or a prospect opens your email, you get notified that somebody opened an email. Maybe you give people 100 of those every month, and at the end of the month, it resets back to zero, but you give them the fully functioning product. And so as people start to generate more value and they start to use it more in their own internal orgs, they are given then the opportunity to upgrade or to pay for the product because it's generating more value for them. So a faux free trial might be something that worth thinking about. Increasing the functionality of a freemium plan just to sort of engage more people across the board, maybe something worth thinking about. Yeah, and that's probably how I would think about it as of today.
Yeah, and if I try to zoom out to like the context for folks around this, or at least my thinking, a lot of businesses have a fairly dated go-to-market motion, right? Like folks have to sign up for a demo to get in the product. You have a BDR that's qualifying that demo, and then you have an expensive sales rep that's doing a demo, and then really high-touch engagement with the prospect through the journey. And then maybe you eventually get into a trial or a proof of concept, and it's a several-month sales cycle. I think people are realizing right now that while that was okay in a a great economy and you could spend a lot on customer acquisition, people are realizing the economics of that aren't in their favor right now, and that cost of acquisition is just really hard to justify on the ROI. So folks are looking to find ways to automate things, and I think the more you can take that was being done by people and move it into the product, that's going to be a better experience for a solid segment of your customer base that doesn't necessarily want to wait or have that much back and forth. And it's going to be a lot more effective from a LTV to CAC standpoint. And so I think when you look at companies that do that, companies like OpenView calls this product-led growth, and we have a whole market map and index of companies that are following these practices. The companies that are leaning into product-led growth techniques tend to find that they have a much more efficient business model, and their ability to scale is decoupled from the costs in a much greater way than a traditional SaaS company. So like an example in our portfolio is Calendly, which is a meeting scheduling tool. And they actually have been, you might think, oh, people aren't scheduling as many meetings right now, or their core customer or sales reps, marketing folks, customer success, they're growing as fast as ever at the moment. And they have found that they're able to grow extremely quickly at scale and with very high profit margins, not needing a whole lot of funding to support that growth. And that their way of going to market right now aligns very well with the moment and where their buyers are. And so I think that people are looking to those kinds of companies as role models of how they might want to build a business going forward.
Got it.
Kyle, I have a question, just as and I don't know what you can and can't share as it relates to Calendly, but do you think that is that partly because you said they're growing faster or just as fast as they had been before? Is there a particular motion that because you mentioned the sales motion, right? I think that's super interesting. Is there a particular change that they made, call it mid-March, that has allowed them to take advantage of this? Or was this sort of more serendipitous just by the way of people are at home more, they can't just sort of drop by somebody's desk, and so they're sending out calendar invites or calendar requests in an email? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so I think one change they did make that has helped on the top of funnel side is they've made integrations with tools like Zoom one of their free features. So that was normally not one of their free capabilities. And as Zoom has taken off, they've been able to have a really close partnership. And so that's actually something where I think we talked about that as one of the options of, can you add value to plans? If you have a Zoom integration or a Slack integration, now's a great time to start offering that to more of your customers. And you can lean into the remote work use case and piggyback on the growth of these really popular tools. So that's certainly one. And I think it's helpful with some of these product-led businesses to be able to have a fairly large TAM that they can sell into. If you're a business like Toast selling or Trip Actions, where you have a really fixed kind of use case around hospitality, you're struggling right now. And I think Calendly has benefited from having a pretty wide set of folks who could still use the product, including verticals like education that are growing now, trying to adopt more remote technology and still have budget, at least more budget than some other companies have.
So we are going to move to the category in just a moment for adding product value to existing tiers without changing prices. Before we do, let's just spend one more moment on launching a freemium edition or fully free product, because I know, Kyle, I think this was like one of the top 10 innovative pricing strategies that we saw in a blog post from OpenView. So I know Peter mentioned freemium for a moment. Any other color you would add or advice that you would give to founders who don't currently have a freemium offering but might want to consider?
Yeah, so it's been really fascinating to see the number of companies that have launched freemium editions. Even GitHub is now free for teams. And what I found interesting about that is the CEO emphasized that it wasn't a short-term promotion. It was something that they had wanted to do, but they accelerated that given the current environment. So I think like a lot of the rules of freemium still apply. Like you have to have a business that's set up and a product that's set up to succeed with freemium, and those rules don't change just because of the current environment. I think it's more of if freemium was a good idea before, it's an even better idea now. If it wasn't a good idea before, it's probably not a great idea now. I like Peter's idea of having usage limitation where you can, and giving a certain usage cap for every month, just to have a really clear, I call it a compelling event in which that drives you to convert. And I think Zoom's like 40-minute time limit on a group meeting is the perfect example. Like if you have a one-on-one meeting, you don't run into their limits. But if you have a group meeting, which is normally like an important meeting or a sales call, and you have that meeting shut down after 40 minutes, that's a really clear, compelling event where you're like, shit, I'm going to pay for this product. And I think usage limitations are much better at that than just saying you can unlock these sort of premium features if you pay, which is the classic Evernote challenge of people don't really care that much about them and don't have exposure into what those are. And so there's a major discovery problem. I think the other thing I'd add is one thing I've been fascinated about recently is this idea of commoditizing your compliments. And so there are other products that might be required for your customer to see value in your product, or that gets adopted first. And so I think if you look at like a GoDaddy or a MailChimp, for a MailChimp, you have to have a website and you have to have a domain, and then you start generating emails from your customer base, and then you can start communicating with them. They've started offering free domains for up to 5 years, and they have a free website builder product. And they do that because a lot of businesses have been pivoting online right now, trying to figure out an online and e-commerce business model. And they can offer free products that accelerate that and that naturally lead people to buy their paid edition, and they don't cannibalize anything that MailChimp charges for. Now, of course, Squarespace probably doesn't like that because the way they monetize is with domains and website building tools. But if you can find things that make it easier for your customer to adopt your technology, those are really interesting freemium plays.
Got it. Peter, any other thoughts?
No, I think you covered it. I think just to reinforce the idea of a compelling event, know what that is, and then know what the trigger is to get people to pay, right? So in the case of Zoom, it's the number of minutes or participants they may use. In other regards, for Slack, it's the amount of history that you can keep in your tool. For, I don't know what it is off the top of my head for Calendly. Perhaps if they were to launch a freemium plan, maybe it's the number of scheduled meetings that you can send. But you need to know what those, one, the compelling event is, two, what the value metric that's ultimately going to drive people to convert.
Yep. So also a good segue into another, what looks to be a very popular category, adding product value to existing tiers without changing prices. I think it's, Peter and Kyle, you both have touched on this in a few different ways. But maybe let's try to bring it together and sum it up within the frame of, if you are speaking with a founder, early stage, what advice would you give them? What guidelines should they keep in mind? What kind of conditions should they keep in mind when they're thinking about adopting the strategy of adding product value to existing tiers? And let's break that into, well, this is retention, but I guess it could be a source of new business as well, but probably more important for retention of current customers.
So is the question sort of adding product value to existing tiers, is this independent of price points or independent of, okay.
Exactly.
I think, like, as generally speaking, as good, if you're an operator, as good hygiene, you should be keeping some level of pulse on what the quote unquote market wants, right? Whether that's you're having conversations with your customers, and I know that we have various size companies that may end up listening to today, but I think that you should be, one, talking to your customers in some sort of capacity. And there's a zillion blogs out there that'll tell you what to do. But the reality is, even if you just pick up your phone have a couple conversations a month to figure out sort of what's happening in their world. What you will discover is probably far more valuable than running a bunch of market research surveys. Outside of that, I think that's sort of what the product team needs to do. That's what the product development needs to do. If you're a small company, it's what the leadership team needs to do. And then you can sort of decide from there, okay, look, it turns out that because of COVID-19, because the positioning changed from generating revenue to saving on costs, one of the things that we should do is we should build, an integration into Xero or into QuickBooks or into something of that nature that allows you to, directly transfer money without paying an ACH fee or something of that nature, right? Off the top of my head. I think the other side perhaps of this is, the other side, as it relates to product value, without necessarily changing price points, is companies mature, markets mature, companies grow, individuals grow. If you are not changing, I guarantee your competitors are, right? ProfitWell, just purely as an example, we integrate today into 10 plus subscription different platforms, Stripe, Zora, Braintree, PayPal, et cetera. I mentioned early on, we thought we only needed to integrate with one or two because they were the mainstays. It turns out that some of our competitors back then started integrating with more, and then the more they integrated with, the more data you have into a system. And so we decided, hey, we need to drop everything we're doing, and we need to hire engineers so we can build more integrations capabilities into different plans or into different platforms. So I think without just sort of evolving over time, you're sort of stuck. Right. I don't know if that's oversimplifying the question here, though, Russ.
Yep. No. That's a good insight. Kyle, anything you would add?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to think about, I think in a great economy, people are concerned about new customers and new business and kind of ignore the retention side of things. Like the amount of attention that's paid to retaining customers and growing them is way less than on the new business side. When you can think about any ROI of what you're spending is actually a lot greater on the retention side. And I think you'll realize that if you look at it, there's probably certain capabilities in the product, and integrations are a key one, that make the product stickier and harder to for the customer to cut. And there's other things around driving the product into your customer's workflow. So how they're doing work, which might look different today than how they did work in the past. And so I think in particular, if you don't have a Slack integration, that's something you should probably think about accelerating on your roadmap. You don't have a Zoom integration and it's relevant, same comment. And so I would just encourage folks to really look at the integrations that are really important for customers right now to make the product stickier and something that your customers are using ideally every single day as part of their processes. That's just going to make it really hard for them to turn off your product later on.
Yeah, makes sense. We had one question come in from the audience, going back to the topic of freemium products. In the case of freemium, would you get the client to sign your contract up front with a $0 value up to the trigger or a compelling event? Or would you get them to sign the contract once they go into a paying plan? Is that question clear to you both?
I think people are going to be hard pressed to sign a contract for a freemium plan.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know, this goes into sort of the behavioral economics of how people think about pricing. Right. And we've all experienced, free trial, but put in your credit card. And even if it's not a lot, there's some tinge of anticipatory fear there. If I put in my credit card, even though they say they're not going to charge me, are they going to charge me? Or if I forget that it's there and I don't use the product, they're going to charge me. So I would opt for not signing a contract, right? Let your product do the talking to some degree. And if it creates enough value and people want it, and then you take it away from them just because that, they exceed some level of events, well, then, theoretically they'd come and they'd sign a contract. But I suppose it may be on a product to product basis. I don't know what Kyle thinks there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, to me, as Peter said before, freemium is more about a marketing channel and a way to drive acquisition into your product. And we've even seen that. We've run a product benchmark survey that we're launching in June, and companies with a freemium model just get a lot more of their website traffic to turn into product users than companies with a free trial or a demo. And so if you start asking people to sign a contract before getting into freemium, then you're losing the advantage of top of funnel leads, which is kind of the point.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming up close to the end. We've covered free trials and promotions. We have covered adding product value, so a couple of the really big themes. Maybe let's just spend a couple quick minutes on the basics, the blocking and tackling of what kind of changes can you make to traditional contract terms, whether it be duration, payment frequency. Again, we touched on it quickly, but maybe let's just wrap it up for folks who are tuned in. Peter, I know you mentioned if you're going to provide discounts for 2 months, add it to the end of the contract and try to preserve that lifetime value. Advice you both would give for when you make changes to contract terms and in what instances?
Yeah, I think Kyle mentioned a chunk of these up front, the idea of extending the contract, a couple months longer or whatever. One of the things that we see collectively on the price intelligence side of our business, we collect a lot of information from the market about what companies value or what their company's customers value. One of the things that undoubtedly comes up survey after survey or project after project is that the market at large, whether you're big or small, values some level of support. Support can be broken down into premium support, that's one-to-one account management. It could be broken down into phone support, right? Priority phone support, live chat, email support, or forum support. And we've experienced, I think as consumers, we've experienced all of them, right? Now, one of the things that we also know is that it's a really good add-on for people to use. Many people use it or include it inherently within the product. So if you buy, I'm just going to use HubSpot as an example. I have no idea if this is the case, but if you buy HubSpot today, you also get premium support with it. What I would recommend in a case like this is actually decouple premium support from the product or the platform itself and use that as an add-on. Now you can charge for that, but when it comes to something like a discounting, you can use that as a tool or as a bit of a drug in this particular case to say, hey, look, if you buy today, I can't give you a financial discount, or I can't give you a flat fee discount, but what I can do is I can include premium support for 6 months. Or I can include implementation fee that is normally $2K. I can waive that today. You give people something, but you don't necessarily take away from the long-term value of your product, and you don't erode the opportunity to generate more revenue when that list price comes time to renew.
Yep. Makes sense. Kyle, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the other thing from my standpoint is just to clarify for folks. I think right now, one of the barriers for customers to buy is not necessarily the price of your product, but more about being locked into a long-term prepaid agreement with no ability to back out should something happen to the project they're working on or their business in general. There's just so much uncertainty, right? And so the uncertainty to me says contract terms and payment structures are certainly a great way to try to unblock some of that pipeline without resorting immediately to discounts. And it's something that I think CFOs have stopped sales reps from abusing that opportunity in the past, but there's a chance to revisit that. I think in particular, what I'm seeing is if you have an annual contract model paid up front, moving to something like a 1-year contract that's paid quarterly and with a 4-month opt-out clause, the customer can opt out if they're not seeing value at 4 months or something's happening with their business. That's a nice compromise, right? It's not going all the way to month, no commitment. And your customer is getting more flexibility. You retain some of the protections of an annual agreement. And so I'd look to things like that help your customer solve that pain point of uncertainty and help you be able to close the deal without having to just discount on price.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, we're coming up on 12:45. I'll put it to the audience quickly. If there are any other questions from folks, click that Q&A button down at the bottom, pop them in, and we'll try to get maybe like 1-sentence answers from Peter and Kyle. For just a minute, I am going to take over the screen myself before we do some closing remarks with everybody. Just so everyone who's tuned in is aware, we have a couple additional webinars coming up from the Venture Lane side this Thursday, and this is a busy screen, so feel free to take a screenshot. Coming up this Thursday, we have How to Automate Sales While Your Team is Spread Thin. And for that, we'll have David Donlan, Chief Revenue Officer at Zulu, and Mary Rogel, Key Account Executive at Path Factory. So David and Mary were talking about some of the processes you can put in place with your sales teams to do more with less, which of course was a theme of today's discussion. And then coming up on Tuesday next week, we have how to pass VC due diligence without meeting in person. Obviously, a bit of a change in the current climate, investors and founders not being able to meet in person as they did before, and that is increasing some of the due diligence efforts on both parties. So we'll have Olivia Liu from General Catalyst and Gara of Thule from F Prime Capital talking about how due diligence processes have changed at their respective funds and how founders can navigate those with some success. So that's what we have coming up next week. I'll stop sharing my screen. And we did have a couple other questions come in. Very quickly, Peter and Kyle, lightning round. You got one more to answer. For earlier stage companies that have intensive implementation processes, does freemium still make sense? Is there an alternative pricing strategy here beyond charging an implementation fee? One sentence answers, Peter and Kyle.
Yeah, there's some nuance here. I think like it's a case-by-case basis. I would have this person think about something like a proof of concept, a paid proof of concept, so that they protect like the work it takes to implement something. And then the prospect feels like, hey, if it's successful, we'll move forward. If it's not, I'm okay with spending X amount of dollars to keep the vendor, at least in this case, whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Classic freemium doesn't make sense. And Peter's point, one thing I've seen work is having it be a paid POC, but being willing to credit the spend on the POC towards a longer term agreement as that hook where it's essentially free if they end up committing. And so it's a win-win, and making sure you ask for clear success criteria going in so that the customer and you can both be held accountable for success.
Yep. Great answer. So that's it. We're coming up on 12:45. Peter, Kyle, thank you so much for your time. Just to recap, it sounds like there are a lot of traditional pricing strategies that folks are still doing in the present day. And it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to maybe take more of a product-led growth type of approach, adding product value, having different sort of product value clips in your arsenal so that you don't always have to go back to changing price, whether it's for winning new business or retaining your current customers. Any quick recap headliners that you'd like to put on this before we close? Anything I missed?
I think so. Talk to your customers, figure out where your customer value lies, and OpenView's got a ton of content on product-led growth. I think they were the originators of it. So I think understanding value from a customer perspective and then understanding product-led growth, you can start to be particularly dangerous. And don't give up the ship just because we're in COVID-19. Don't make the mistake that ProfitWell did early on in March and give up a 50% discount that didn't net out in anything. Huge chunk of time wasted there.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, thanks for the plug, Peter. And we actually have our new season of the OV Build podcast launches tomorrow. And the first episode has Dave Groh, the president at Lucidchart, which despite this environment, I think was recently able to raise funding at $1 billion valuation, talking about the new customer journey and how they've adopted product-led growth. And it's been phenomenally successful for them. So quick plug for that. And feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you guys want to talk through anything on pricing or packaging.
Fantastic. All right, Peter, Kyle, thank you again. And for everyone tuned in, hope to see you at another webinar very soon. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, folks.
Everyone.